Welcome again to Orthodoxy Live, an ongoing mission that is a collaboration between the Departments of Christian Education and of Internet Ministries for the Eastern American Diocese of the Serbian Orthodox Church, with the blessing of His Grace Bishop Irene. Our goal each week is to bring interesting speakers and guests to share a little bit about the Orthodox faith with the world. And today, our guest speaker is Father Larry Soper, who will be speaking on the topic identifying the pattern of substance abuse in your loved ones.
Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill to men. We praise Thee, we bless Thee, we worship Thee, we glorify Thee, we give thanks to Thee.
All right, so now I'd like to welcome Father Larry live from Manhattan in New York City. Good evening, Father. Welcome to Orthodoxy Live.
Good evening, Father. How are you?
I am doing good. Staying warm out here in a heat wave in the Midwest. I don't know if it's any better in New York, but I hope you're staying cool.
It's always a heat wave from June to August in the crowded New York streets, but we're cool in our tiny little apartment, so we're doing well.
Well, I do appreciate you turning off your air conditioner to to help us with the microphone. So we were sorry for causing you a little discomfort with the warmth, but it is truly a joy to have you here with us tonight. We here in North Canton are quite familiar with the many pastoral talents that Father Larry brings to his ministry, but for those of you who are meeting Father Larry for the first time, here's a little bit about him. Father Larry spent a decade working in the field of mental health and addiction at the IBH Center for Recovery and at the Terry House, both in Akron, Ohio. He was also the founder of the St. Paul Project, a nonprofit home dedicated to serving the homeless, those in recovery, and those suffering from other mental ill health issues. Father Larry holds degrees from Kent State University, Charter Oak State College, and is a graduate of St. Vladimir Seminary, where he earned his Master's of Divinity in 2019. He has written and spoken extensively about the nature of addiction being relative to mental health in a variety of formats. Father Larry is now an attached priest at St. John the Baptist in Paterson, New Jersey, and just this year, prior to the pandemic, like maybe 2 weeks prior to the general shutdown, I was fortunate to visit Father Larry along with a number of students from Stark County, Ohio, and they were blessed with an experience of Serbian hospitality at St. John the Baptist, and Father Larry was able to offer them a fantastic lecture and quite a bit of info about Orthodoxy as well. He kept the attention of 30 or 40 high school students for quite a bit of time, and I have to tell you, that's an impressive feat. And tonight, we are all excited to hear your very important lecture on identifying the pattern of substance abuse in your loved ones. But before he begins, I'd like to remind all of you out there that the goal of Orthodoxy Live is not only to present topics live to all of you, but it's to offer a forum for interaction and engagement. So be sure to post your questions in the comments. I'll be monitoring our live feed throughout the talk. And if your question is on topic and appropriate, we will present it to Father Larry to answer. So all that being said, Father Larry, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Father, and thank you for the kind words. That's very, very humbling. You made me sound very experienced, but the topic that we're going to talk about tonight is maybe less academic than some of the other talks that you've had, because when we're talking about something like substance abuse, there's a lot of science and everybody's heard a lot of theories. But for us as Orthodox Christians, as husbands and fathers and mothers, grandmothers and wives, it's really a lesson of the heart. Substance abuse isn't something that you can very easily take a pill for and cure like a lot of other ailments. So it's very difficult, and there's a lot of emotion in it. So a few of the things that I want to talk about tonight is identifying substance abuse, but give you a little bit of background about what we're facing now. Since 2017, the rate of substance abuse in America, especially among those under 40, has skyrocketed. You're looking at maybe a 20% increase in diagnosable substance abuse issues. We're looking at a different spectrum of drugs and things that are abused by people. So we really need to kind of take this and put it in a nice little compact idea for everybody to understand. And I just want to go into a little bit of background. And excuse me, I want to get something, you guys. I spent 10 years working at an addiction center in Akron, Ohio. And I will tell you that I've attended more funerals than I ever want to attend for young people. I have been to many courtrooms in America where I've watched parents cry, mothers cry, grandparents in shock of their loved ones getting long-term prison sentences. I've delivered the news of someone overdosing and dying to parents and trying to console them through the initial shock. I've been there when we've had to sit down with the patient at our clinic, a young person, just like a young person in Jackson, Ohio, or Patterson, New Jersey, or Manhattan, or Akron, Ohio, and tell them that they now have to live a life with an HIV diagnosis. I've seen the absolute carnage and wreckage that substance abuse has caused American families. And not all of these families ever had an idea that someone close to them, whether it was their son, their daughter, their grandson, granddaughter, husband, or wife, had these issues. Because addiction is cunning, baffling, and powerful. We maybe, I don't know, Father, I mean, I may be a little older than you, but when we were growing up, the idea of an addict or an alcoholic was always the hobo under the bridge with the bottle of wine in a paper bag and smoking cigarettes, and they were what we just, as a society, the forgotten and disregarded. They couldn't, function. It was always something that was somebody else's problem. It was a problem of the poor, people who didn't have good parents. And so for us in the suburbs or us in the church community, we had this idea that our kids and our friends, we wore nice clothes, we went to church, we were altar boys, and we didn't have any idea that addiction could ravage our community, the same as it did communities of other socioeconomics. So when you talk about identifying patterns, there's really no identifiable thing. You have the idea that someone will start looking or smelling like alcohol and drugs, and those are the easy things. But it's the exteriors that are too late. Is identifying comes from before the addiction manifests itself into the destructive thing that it is. Today, several of the reasons that are well documented that substance abuse is so apparent in our society through all stages of society, from rich to poor to in between to the educated, the non-educated. Substance abuse doesn't discriminate. Is you look at stress. Stress is a major player in substance abuse. The suicide rate in America has gone up almost 20% amongst white males. Amongst white females, it's not much far behind that. And stress has been the number one identifier for why these things are happening. Suicide and substance abuse. Suicide is basically a symptom of substance abuse one of those awful things that goes along with the disease. So we can look at identifying some of these patterns, but we look at the lifestyle, we look at stress, we look at economic stress, we look at family crisis. In today's world, families are both parents are working two jobs. We have now on top of this with the COVID crisis, we have fear of all kinds of other insecurities. Social media with kids can be sometimes not always a positive influence, and it's a lot for parents to kind of take in. So when we look at identifying, we need to look at where our stressors are in life, and we need to look within ourselves at our own family histories. Family history plays a gigantic role in substance abuse. When you look back at your family history, it's been proven that it's definitely genetic. That if there's someone, a parent or a grandparent or farther down the family line, that substance abuse has been an issue, the rates of those in the family being prone to substance abuse are almost 50% greater than those who don't come from it. So it's definitely a family disease. One of the things that I found to be very shocking was it's very hard to say my father was an alcoholic or my mother was an alcoholic or my grandmother was an alcoholic because social attitudes have changed. You know, grandpa might have drank every night of the week, but no one thought he was an alcoholic. So that's very difficult to prove. One of the things that I wanted to focus on is the stereotype. The idea that addicts and alcoholics and those with substance abuse issues are completely failing at life, or they're homeless, or they're always in trouble with the law is not always the case. Substance abuse is a slow brewing issue. So you could have someone who's doing very well in high school, doing very well in college, doing very well in their careers, maybe even a little older. You may think, what a great functioning parent they are, what a wonderful member of our community. But inside, there's this inner turmoil that when the bottom finally falls out, a lot of people didn't know that it was coming. So these are some of the things that I think we need to really look at. So before I get into a few of the things that I wanted to also talk about was when I started at the Recovery Center in 2006, we had about 25 patients that were all maybe in their 40s and 50s that suffered from alcoholism. By the time I left this treatment center in 2016, we had well over 100 patients. None of them abused alcohol. They were all young, and their primary drug of choice was opiates. And this seems to be the scourge of places, especially in the Midwest, places that really affect our diocese: Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, New York, New Jersey, is opioids. It's painkillers that sometimes are prescribed. And people have an opportunity to go through this long process of addiction through painkillers. That they always say the new drug dealer isn't the guy on the corner with the trench coat that's giving kids the drugs. It's the medicine cabinet at grandma's house. So, you know, these are some of the things that we're facing now. All sorts of over-the-counter medications. And these are a real issue in our schools and in our high schools. So that's one of the things that I think we really need to be aware of is this new opioid crisis. So when I left and started the St. Paul Project in 2014, my idea was to tend to people that were from everyday life, that were people from the suburbs, that were people that weren't always under the bridge or had spent a long time in prison. And when I started to present the idea of this facility in this home, I had parents calling me daily about getting their kids into our facility for help. We had parents who said, we're at our wits' end with opiate addiction. We're at our wits' end with our son or daughter stealing and robbing. And they always said, and Deacon, I was a deacon at the time, they said, Deacon, our son is an honor student. He's a star athlete. He's a star basketball player. And he has fallen off into this deep black hole of addiction. But he never smelled like alcohol. He never smelled like marijuana. And we found that most of the case, 80% of the patients we were taking into our home were opiate addicted. And this is the real issue right now. It is prevalent in our schools. Opiate addiction is probably one of the hardest things to detect because it leaves no odor. It's not like marijuana where you can smell it. It's not like alcohol where it's on the breath. Opiates are very easily transferred from person to person in a pill form. They're hard to identify. And the other thing about opiate addiction is that it is the drug of choice of those 15 to 30 years old. I think that today, more kids, from my experience, working 10 years in addiction services, abuse opiates, whether it's in the pill form or some other cough syrup, than alcohol ever was in eras like the 1970s, 1980s, and maybe even the 1990s. And what this eventually leads to, unless there's some intervention, is it's a very simple pattern. It starts with opioids of the pill form, seems to be the classic case, moves on to heroin. Now, in between, there's things like fentanyl and other things which are just basically more prescription drugs. But 90%, 9 out of every 10 that I served at the St. Paul Project that were addicted to heroin started their addictions from prescription drugs. And that seems to be the big launching pad, I guess would be the best word, into what we now see in America as this grip of heroin addiction. And it doesn't stop with young people. We have this idea that this is a young person's problem, but it's not. Over my experience and working in opiate addiction, I worked at a place called Terry House in Akron, Ohio. It's a fine facility. It handled a lot of older patients. And we've seen patients coming in their 60s, 70s, all the way up into their 80s with opiate addiction. And you can think, wow, can someone at this age be an opiate addict? We have this idea of the opiate addict being someone disheveled and under the bridge. But we had probably half of our opiate addicts at the Terry House residence that were senior citizens. Now, how does something like this happen? You know, it's very easy today, although rules are tightening a little bit, to go to the doctor to explain, I have this chronic back condition, I have this knee condition, I have this arm condition, all these things. And prescriptions are written so generously and frivolously that after someone started on a pain pill when they were 50 years old, 20 years later, the doctor decides that maybe that's no longer necessary. You have a fully functioning opiate addict who starts to go into withdrawal, who starts to feel the symptoms of not having their drug and this mental crutch, and they start to come apart as a human being. They become spiritually sick. They become devoid of any type of logic or reason, because what they've been doing, what they thought was a safe doctor-prescribed issue, that they no longer have. And we see this over and over again in the opiate crisis. So opiates are seemingly to be the big thing right now that we really don't have an answer for. So what can we do about this? You know, I can sit here all night maybe and list all the problems, but I just want to go down the idea that we need to be open with our families. We need to be open with our friends, with our loved ones, and especially with the church. In 2015, I did a survey, a very extensive survey, with a colleague from the Roman Catholic Diocese of Cleveland. We sampled Orthodox Christian youth from 16 maybe to 30s about where they would go if they had a substance abuse problem, and most of them already did. Where would they most likely feel comfortable talking about this issue if they needed to turn to help? And in our side of the street, we finished, the church and the clergy finished last. The data that we took showed me and my colleagues that young people who were suffering or starting to feel like an addiction was brewing, or they were having issues with maybe other things, depression, some other mental health, some other confusion about life that was causing them to maybe explore substances. The church and the clergy were not ranking very high on avenues of help. They would find help with friends from high school, possibly teachers, and shockingly, other religious groups. I'm sure there's some fine pastors in the Protestant faith that were listed above us. Some alternative religions and some of the people affiliated those were ranked higher. Now, this was just a study done in the Summit County, Cuyahoga County area, but I'm going to gather that it probably holds true. So one of the things that I think about when I think of my time in ministry as a deacon and now for as being a priest for a year is the church is the spiritual hospital. And if our kids and our loved ones can't come to us, whether it's the laity, whether it's the clergy, and say, this is a safe place for me to say I need help, then I have concerns about that. We should be ranking first of a place where someone could go. So what's some of the solutions to that? And one of the things I think is that we need to talk with our young people more. Father, you and I did a trip to one of these facilities, and we got to bring some of the youth from our parish back at St. George in Canton. And I thought we had a really profitable day. We went and we spent time in some of these facilities. And then afterwards, we were able to talk with some of our youth in the parish about what they're experiencing in their lives and in their schools. I think it's vital that we continue and start vibrant youth ministries that we're able to break down the embarrassments and stereotypes. Because if we think that our kids as Orthodox Christians, whether they're Serbians, Russians, Greeks, Armenians, whatever, that they're not exposed to this in their schools, then we have wool over our eyes. Our kids are exposed to it. And this goes for our older people. You know, husbands today and wives, providing for families, taking care of children, paying the bills, going to church, going to school, doing all the things that we do, we're exposed to it. There's no immunity from the onslaught of addiction. Now, at the church, what can we say? We're there as priests, we're there as laity, we're there as support. But what do we say when a young person comes to us and says, this is the struggle that I'm going through. Father, I'm struggling with opiate addiction or alcoholism, or I'm smoking too much pot. These are the things they'll say. Or I'm in an inappropriate relationship with other kids at my school or at my university. and I have nowhere else to turn. What do we say? What's the great text that we can pull out to say, here, Johnny or Susie, this is what you should do? We as clergy need to branch out, and the laity, and learn and educate ourselves. For a long time, church and maybe social services in our local communities have had too much of a gulf between us. But in every community, there's support for clergy, there's support for laity, that I suggest, and what I found very effective is working hand in hand with the resources that each community offers. And that brings me to the stigma. I've had so many parents, they would come to me and say, Johnny is having addiction issues. Johnny is drinking too much. He's been in trouble. We're afraid that he's going to overdose and die. Father, can you help him? And that's a great responsibility that we take upon ourselves. And I think any clergyman or any layperson who tries to take that on themselves is being irresponsible, because the next thing that we need to do is, addiction is a disease, and we need to get medical intervention. Do not be afraid of picking up the phone and getting an expert on the line, because it's someone's life that you're talking about. If you need to go to the parents and have a sit down with the family to say, your son, daughter, husband, wife, loved one, even grandma who might be abusing, needs to seek medical help from a therapist or a psychoanalyst, or maybe even get a room in an inpatient treatment center. These are the tough things that we have to do, that we don't have the answers. It cannot just be, God has given us the ability to work with science, the medical community, and that stigma of someone getting mental health treatment or substance abuse treatment has to be broken down. That idea that as a community, that one of our own that we've raised up as a church community, as a family, can have these issues, we have to face that they probably do. And I can tell you, if there's any of my fellow clergy out there, that if you think some of the kids sitting in your pews on Sundays aren't struggling with these issues, and they get up and they walk out the door after coffee hour, they come up, they kiss the cross, and they're not talking with us. Why is that? And we need to take a strong look at our youth ministry, our connection with the young, our connection with parents. I know this is hard stuff, and this is probably not something, but I have seen it. I have been to a lot of funerals. I have watched judges sentence kids to 15 to 20 years in prisons that came from good schools and good churches, because families didn't want to risk the embarrassment of getting them the help that they needed when there were warning signs, when maybe there was some withdrawal in their behavior, when maybe their son or daughter had a cold 365 days a year, or were sick, or that you were constantly missing money out of your purse, mom or dad, or out of your wallet, or grandma suddenly noticed that half her pill bottle was gone. These are things, these are warning signs. But if we don't want to say anything because the exterior looks so good, then our kids are on their way to the grave or prison. Some of the other resources that you can use that are completely anonymous that I highly recommend is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a 12-step program that's been around, founded in Akron, Ohio since the 1930s, is vital. And as priests and deacons and lay people and people from our higher offices in our church, I really implore them to get acquainted with these groups. Narcotics Anonymous is phenomenal. Also, I want to tell you that addiction is a family disease, and it's very contagious. And you could say, Father Larry, how is addiction contagious? It's because When husband, son, or daughter or wife is suffering from addiction issues, everybody suffers. The wreckage, the emotional despair, the worry that goes on can rip a family apart. As Christians, we know that the family is the God given nucleus of our life. And when that's ripped apart, and it is allowed to be ripped apart by the vanity of we don't want to say anything because we don't want people to think we're bad parents or a bad pastor or we have a bad church community, we need to smash that type of thinking. These groups, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, are completely, as they say, anonymous. There's good people there, and while they might not always be Orthodox Christians, and believe me, there are many in those rooms, it is saved the lives of millions of people worldwide. And those who are active in those programs have found to be more productive in society, more spiritually fit. I had Father Ralph Martin, a famous Roman Catholic priest, said in a famous talk in New York City that he found much more spirituality and honesty in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous than he did in his parish in Baltimore, Maryland. And for the times that I've sat in those rooms with patients year after year and watched them pour their hearts out about addiction and their sufferings and see them get well through this 12-step process, which costs nothing and is in every town in America, I think of how I can learn as a minister myself, and how this wonderful God-given group can help people of all denominations, of all walks of life. And I think it's something we as Orthodox Christians need to embrace, that there's help and resources out there for those who suffer from this. Treatment centers in America are wonderful places. There is a treatment center in every community that if financial resources are low, that you can find ways to get a loved one in there. But again, Father, what I would, hope to drive home is the stigma. I come from an ethnic family. Most of us in the Orthodox Church have strong ethnic backgrounds, whether it's Greek, Russian, Serbian. Sometimes for us, it's a little tougher to overcome these stigmas, that we look at addiction and substance abuse as a moral weakness. He is weak. He has bad character. He just needs to not drink so much. He just needs not to use so much. He needs to get up and go to work. Well, today's world of substance abuse, it's not a character issue. It's a disease like any other, and that with proper treatment, medical treatment or social treatment, can be arrested. Millions of people have recovered, and it's not an easy journey. But I think it is our responsibility as lay people and clergy in the church and as Christians to not judge, because we know our Lord never judged and opened his arms to everybody that came to him. And as we try to emulate that Christ mind and that Christ behavior, we have to love till it hurts. Many, many times when I opened the St. Paul Project, my patients in the facility, the first thing they did to this beautiful home that we bought in Akron, Ohio, was they robbed us. They stole everything out of our house. My partners in that venture were quite upset. So was I. My anger was beyond. How could this happen? But we look at the Christ mind, Christ would invite them back. For those of you struggling with family members, and you know who you are, and I pray for you if you're out there and you're listening. They may hurt you, they may steal from you, they may cause you unbelievable grief to the point where you want to give up on them or say he is no good or she is no good. I'm done. That is not what Christ calls us to do. As hard as it is, we must fight this disease with love. You know, and I'm going to be somewhat controversial here, Father. There was an old thing in the 80s and 90s that talked about tough love. You got to be tough. You got to show them who's the boss, and if they continue to do this behavior, they're not welcome here. And boundaries are good. Trust me, you need to have boundaries. But when it comes to pushing away our loved ones or making them feel unwelcome, and God forbid if they feel unwelcome at their church, that is something that we need to look at ourselves. Are we contributing? And maybe sometimes with this financial stress that we're all under, and families that I've worked with and continue to work with, maybe a little more love and gratitude for what we have, and maybe less acquiring, and maybe more listening to our kids and to our loved ones will help us find out when things aren't going so good. So thank you, Father.
I'm going to jump in here, mostly because, as happens with many of our very good talks, we have quite a few questions, actually. So I would, just so that we can get through maybe one more than we usually do, we'll try to keep some of these, I guess, can't be brief, but just a short answer to some of these if you can. Susan asked us, how do you handle someone, or how can we maybe handle someone who is addicted but doesn't want any help, maybe pushes away that help? How can we still get them to that place?
You know, there's this saying that says you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But you can make him thirsty along the way. That is a stage. It's denial. And one thing that I find effective with that is love and honesty. And what I mean by this is this person may push you away. What you're left with now is love, to where you express in all honesty and in all your heart how this person's behavior is affecting you. Sometimes addicts are not bad people. It's the substances, it's the disease that's talking a lot. But your loved one, and if you're still involved in their life, there has to be some connection. So what I can tell you, let them know how you feel, how this is affecting you, maybe the other loved ones, with all your heart and all your brokenness, to say, your behavior is doing this and it is hurting me. Now, sometimes that's not going to work. And there are programs. I recommend Al-Anon, which you can look up in the yellow pages, if we still use yellow pages. And you'll find countless people that are in the same situation. And sometimes talking with them will help you through this. It's a horrible place to be. But all you have left at that point is the love, and to let that person know how their behaviors are affecting you. You have to keep good boundaries so this person doesn't keep hurting you. But eventually, addicts do two things. They either stop using and get well, or they continue on to the bitter ends that we all fear, which are three things: jails, some sort of institution, and eventually death. Prayer is powerful, to pray every day, but to express your feelings and seek help for yourself. And this is why I was talking about that contagious part, that behavior is very contagious and can hurt you. Keep your boundaries, seek some help for yourself, and let that person know how you're feeling.
Thank you, Father. And a voice from your Canton Past, our wonderful KSS president out here, Kathy Tobias, she asked, and I thought about this the other day myself. She works, or if somebody works in a middle or high school, is there research about the DARE programs? What do you think of? I guess what have you seen with these, or what can be done outside of that that is age appropriate to help maybe aid prevention?
First off, but this is I never thought this would be a controversial night. Um, if you look at data on the DARE program, go online and look it up. There's been a lot of wonderful articles on DARE. The one thing that came out of DARE was kids learned the differences between drugs and what they do. I'm personally have not found a great success with DARE. And there's data to back that up. DARE had a lot of T-shirts, coffee cups, and pencils. I don't know if they made a great difference. DARE's been around since the 80s, and addiction rates have been tripling since its existence, especially with young people. What the resources that I think are more appropriate for your school are in your local social services, Catholic Charities. Starr County has variety. I believe you have Quest there, and they have some licensed people that are really good that would come into the schools. They're in Canton, Ohio. They are phenomenal. I would really recommend that route with the social service program. DARE can be, it's a mixed bag. I just haven't seen the data support that it's had a great success. I applaud the police all the way and support them with all of everything they do, but we just haven't seen the great impact that it's made, and some of the data was negative. I would really look at licensed professionals and social workers who have a background in this. You could also look at great programs like Alateen, Teen Institute, which is a Christian-based program, mostly our Protestant brethren, but they have some great programs, educational programs, without the kind of the overbearing scare tactics that I think DARE got a little heavy-handed with, especially in the 80s and 90s. So definitely look at licensed people. It's like anything else. If you have a disease, you want to go to a doctor. So look at your licensed social service providers, and you can find some good help with them, and they will definitely work with the schools.
Excellent, Father. Thank you for that. It's bringing back some of my own memories of DARE back in the 80s and 90s as well. So the next couple of questions I think are somewhat related, and I don't know if these are going to be in your wheelhouse. I think they sound a little pretty specific, I guess, but who knows? You've had quite a broad breadth of experience, so I'll ask them anyway, and if not, we can move on to the next. But drug treatment programs that utilize other addictive drugs like Suboxone, are they just replacing one addictive drug for another?
There's been a lot of talk about Suboxone, Subutex, also known as buprenorphine. It's called medication-assisted therapy. I think where people get this, are we switching addictions? The methadone programs of the 1970s, we all have these horrible images on our television sets and in movies of addicts taking the drink of methadone down at the clinic in some bad neighborhood. The jury is out on those. There's a school of thought that says if you're replacing one drug with the other, what's the difference? And I have a tendency to agree with that. However, by the time you get to that stage, you have to look at it almost in harm reduction ideas. If you're going to be on buprenorphine under a doctor's care, that he's going to give you this drug, this amount of doses for this amount of time, and you're going to take it as prescribed to alleviate the withdrawal symptoms of the drug, then I'm not opposed to it if the alternative is that this person is going to go down to a drug dealer or to a dangerous situation where they could be using needles, or it's the lesser of two evils. I get it. But right now, that's all there is. So I'm going to throw my support to it. There are some cases where people have tried for 10, 15, 20 years where this might be the best it gets. This is a horrible disease. There are no winners in it ever. Will this change? Maybe. But you have to look at it, in my opinion, in harm reduction. Good question. Tough moral struggle. Everybody's going to have an opinion on it. Again, as a clergyman, I'm always going to defer to the physician who knows what's going on. And if that doctor, if you have the faith in him, follow along with what the doctor says, and that's your best bet.
Yeah, a lot of good questions here.
Yeah.
They could probably go on all night because I have many more, but we try to keep it around 4, maybe 5. So I will ask you one more question, and I think this kind of will hit a lot of people where they live. There is, like you said, a stereotype that alcohol and drug addiction is primarily something in those on the fringes of society. And for those of us who live in more suburban areas or even downtown New York, there's often somebody standing on a street corner who is asking for a handout, a few dollars, usually with a sign. And somebody asked the question that sometimes I don't give money, they said, because they assume it's going to go to drugs, but they feel very conflicted about this because they feel like they want to give, but they're worried that they might be supporting something that is destructive. So I guess the person might be looking for how to respond to this in a positive way as we encounter that, I think, on most street corners in America, whether the towns be big, small, or somewhere in between.
Well, I was afraid of this question because I get this a lot. And when you live in New York City, this is something that you face. The greatest sin that I commit on a daily basis is judgment. I judge everything and everybody all the time, subconsciously and consciously, because I'm a flawed sinner. Sometimes I have to look at the person and I know that if I give them $5 or $10 or a buck, whatever, that it's going to drugs and alcohol, and I'm going to continue the destructive pattern. But we have to take that judgment out, because, and Father, this will be controversial. Wait, this is the third time I've said it. For that moment, maybe that the drug use or the alcohol use at that moment and is going to be the relief that this person is hurting so bad and is struggling so bad. Maybe that's not our call to make, if it's going to that. If it is, it is. Then it does. But the idea is, are we giving? The question is to us. We are asked to give, not to judge it. And I'm the worst example, but I can just tell you, give. Always give. Because when we withdraw, then we're withdrawing the ever-giving Christ. And it's not our job to judge it. We might have a hunch, but we could be wrong because we're human. we could say that 99% of our fiber and our logic and our reason, and that person might even have a sign that says, give me $5 because I need another beer, and I've seen those signs, but maybe not. So maybe the person is in our life, and they are, because how are we giving? Are we giving like Christ? Tough call, good question, but I'll be right down the middle. Give. We give till it hurts because our Lord gives to us. We may not be heroin addicts or alcoholics or whatever, but we need that mercy as well in our lives for whatever we're struggling with besides drugs and alcohol. Everybody struggles. I say we give and withdraw the judgment because maybe we're wrong. Maybe that $5 puts them in a cab or something that gets them somewhere where they need some help. You can give with some words too. You can give with, I know this is where it's going, but I love you even though I don't know you, and I pray that you get well. That might be the one time that someone says 10 years from now that I was on the street corner begging, and this person gave me $10 and they said, I love you and I don't know you. I wish you wouldn't use this on drugs, but I'm going to give it to you anyway because you're a human being and a son or daughter of Christ, that I'm going to give it to you. That might be the one time they change their life. But if they go out and blow it on drugs, so what? We give because that's what we're called to do.
And I think that is a very good note to end on. It just so happens I myself asked this question of a priest friend of mine a number of years ago in New York, and your answers were almost identical. They sounded very much the same, and it has kind of been my own mantra as well when it comes to that type of question. So that was a perfect answer to end this wonderful lecture on. Father Larry, thank you again so much for taking the time to be here with us today. I'm sorry it went a little long. The good ones on Orthodoxy Live usually do go a little long because people are engaged and ask questions, but really, thank you so much.
Thank you, Father. Keep up the good work. I miss you, the parish, and keep doing the great work that you guys are doing and helping our blessed, wonderful diocese. And may God give us the strength to keep going.
Amen, Father. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who joined us today, who asked wonderful questions. This is why we do this format as a live event. We don't want this to be a pre-recorded set of lectures. We want people to be able to dialogue and to ask challenging questions that we may or may not have answers to, because in this dialogue, we really have an opportunity to learn, I think, the most. So thanks to all of you out there with us today. And God willing, we will see you next Sunday at 7 p.m. With a talk by Father Aleksa Micic, attached priest at St. Sava Pro Cathedral in New York. So please be sure to join us next Sunday at 7 p.m. God bless.
Yes,